Namaskara and welcome to BIC Talks, a podcast brought to you by Bangalore International Centre, where we present conversations that move, inform, and encourage discourse.
Hi, my name is Lavanya. I am the author of Money Doesn't Grow on Trees. This was a phrase that I also heard very often growing up, to the point where when the time came to put this book together, I couldn't think of any other title than this one phrase, which had been more or less tattooed inside my brain. At the outset, thank you all for coming today. So, what we have today, the first 10 minutes of this session before I get to speak with the very wonderful Deepika, is a set of thoughts that kind of culminated into why the book exists, right? Like people often ask, what do you write about? I think, given the amount of personal finance knowledge that is out there, the question became, why did you write this book? So, I wanted to put together a few thoughts as to why I wrote this book and who I've written it for. So, this book was especially conceived for who I'd like to call my younger self, but today I can call it the 20 to 35 age group, where the struggle with finances is very visible, right? Like, I meet very many smart, accomplished young people who, at the very mention of money, kind of like seize up, which is very odd considering they've done much more difficult things, right? Like doctors, engineers, they've cracked NEET. But the moment you start talking about, okay, like when you start earning, what do you plan to do? Or when you start spending your salary, what do you plan to do? It becomes like, that phase you have when the teacher asks you a question that's out of syllabus. And that's when, you kind of start digging into why we are the way we are. And then you realize that our school systems did fail us in terms of preparing us for the real world. They prepared us for all the entrance exams. They told us to follow a route, which we all did. But the moment we stepped into the real world, we found ourselves unprepared in this particular aspect, right? And one thing I do want to share is that I'm not saying this because I studied chartered accountancy or I cleared chartered accountancy. Let me share a message that I got from a fellow chartered accountant. Um, Even we weren't taught personal finance. My knowledge of personal finance and my personal interest in this subject came because at the start of my practice as a CA, I dealt with more individuals than I did with corporations. So that experience of handling individuals and discussing money with them and getting them to open up about how they viewed finances has lent a lot of the insight that is carried in the book today. Coming back to our present generation or the generation that I spoke about, for most of us, our introduction to money was most likely an Instagram reel. And that's not a bad thing. I think it's fantastic the kind of exposure that we have to finance and money management today on social media. And I think it's very necessary to be exposed to the subject. But the problem with solid money advice is that it's very simple, it's very boring, and after a point, you can't create content out of it. Money advice is not content. And if it was content, it would be really, really boring because it's usually just four or five things all the time on repeat, right? And the problem that starts cropping up when finance influencers get into the game is that they are looking to create content, which means they are looking to get views, which means they're looking to build their audience. And today, if you want to stand out in this world of really cluttered content, right, where like every 3 seconds you have a new Instagram reel showing up, you have to be really audacious, you have to make really clickbait statements, you have to be contrarian, and that can only be more confusing to the average viewer who's looking to get advice, because immediately people start panicking. Immediately you have to elicit a reaction, right, from your content. And that's what they're optimizing for, versus the viewers' financial wellness. Like, I want to be calm about my finances. But the more reels I watch, I only get more stressed, because it's like constantly like, oh, did you know about this? Oh, did you know about that? Oh, did you know what this is happening? So, good money advice rarely makes for exciting content. So, that's the flip side of it. And what is also happening because of social media is that our savings are literally falling off a cliff. Like, this is recent RBI data, which has shown that our household savings has plummeted to a 50-year low in 2023. Right now, the reason I also want to talk about this is to bring attention to the very complicated time that young people in India are living in today. On one hand, you have Instagram fueled aspiration, right? Like, everyone's going on holiday. You need these 5 looks that this fashion influencer is showing. You need these headphones that this other guy is showing. You are fed desire every single day. Combine that with the ease with which you can transact today with UPI, you can close your eyes and complete a transaction. Half the time, I think, if you are scrolling reels at night, just imagine this: you're under your blanket, it's 10:30, you're scrolling reels, an ad pops up, you click on it, it takes you to the website, and the checkout process is so smooth that you've already spent 2000 rupees on UPI without you even realizing it. And the thing about UPI is that it's so effortless that you don't feel like you've spent money. You can literally wake up the next morning and be like, what happened? And because it's tied to a bank account, which feels very abstract, it's somewhere over there in the cloud. You have no visual, cue of your money actually flying away, right? So that is a very dangerous time for a young person to be in. And this is where I also want to say it is not the young person's fault either, because if you look at data a little closely, not only are we now the most indebted people in the world, this is excluding home loans. If you remove home loans, we are now the most indebted people in the world, because our wages have not grown at the same rate at which our desires have. Data actually shows that our salaries have been stagnating for the last decade or so. So, on one hand, you have salaries that are not increasing, and on the other hand, you have really intense aspiration being fed to you. So, that is more or less the genesis of this book, right? You see young people struggling with this, but they're also not able to articulate it, because every conversation about money feels very personal. They all feel very personal. It's like, if you talk about your struggle with money, then you're immediately a failure. It is projected on you as a person versus just a situation that is happening in your life, right? Because of how ill equipped we are to have these conversations about money. And we live in this culture that would rather save face than save their finances. I'll give you another example: Indian weddings. Do you know how many people get into debt? They will take loans for a 2-day affair because society needs to perceive them a certain way, right? Rather than just admit, you know what, this is something that I can't afford. Let me see how I can simplify this. But we'd rather borrow. So, this is the culture that we come from. Add to this the kind of impact that money can have in your day to day life, right? In your relationships. We don't have the vocabulary to speak about money in our closest relationship. So, the culmination of all of this, right? There are very real money issues that young people are grappling with. We are having an entire population, I would say, because India has the highest population of young people in the world right now. We have this entire demographic that does not have the vocabulary to discuss one of the most important tools in their lives. and we weren't taught to be any other way. Why are we struggling with money? Because we weren't taught to actually control money. But the good news is that we can actually come together and start picking up the vocabulary of money, and it's not something to be overwhelmed by. One of the things that I say in the book, and I do hope you pick it up, is that we have this misconception that money is like mathematics, that it's numbers. But I would disagree. I would tell you that money is more like French or Telugu or Kannada or even Tamil. It's a language. It comes with its own vocabulary. And just like picking up a language, the more you speak it, the more you speak it, the more you learn and the easier it becomes. And that is really what this book hopes to be. And that is really um, the genesis behind why I wrote this book. There are lots of things about money that makes us uncomfortable, and I've addressed all of it in the book because I think it's important to get uncomfortable first. It's important to understand the language of money first, understand how it affects us as people. And once we have that vocabulary and once we understand our own relationship with money, learning how to invest and learning everything else that comes with it is very, very simple. So, with that, with that, I think we can go into the conversation. Can I have Deepika on stage, please? Thanks.
Ms. Deepika, seen very many different life stages. Not that I'm very old, but just by being virtue in your 30s, you've seen far too much. And I think the game changer for me was starting my career in Jan of 2008 in the midst of a global financial crisis when markets fell like 50% in that particular year. You're starting at a salary of 12,000 rupees and you're getting a pay cut in 2 months of your first job in life. I mean, 12,000 rupees is way less than what we pay our cooks and nannies and drivers these days. But it's real, right? And as much as we talk about what has changed over the years, I think what hasn't changed is fundamentally how you invest and what you should be doing. And I think Lavanya is very beautifully and in the most simple manner covered that within the book, right? The fundamentals haven't changed at all, including our parents still telling us that money doesn't grow on trees. What is this ridiculous Europe vacation that you're going for? And that doesn't change, and the fundamentals don't change. The puzzle doesn't change when you put the pieces together, it all looks the same, which brings me to my first point of conversation with Lavanya today, right? And I see this room and I see people of different ages and stages here, so that we're talking to everyone with our first section. Like culturally, Lavanya, and you and I know our conversations whenever we've talked, we know how it is for us growing up, especially in South India. It's very different from the North, and we'll get to that part. But culturally, what do you think has changed, if at all, in terms of when you started making your money or when you started thinking about investing and the things you were told?
I think one of the fundamental differences is just the sheer exposure to the kind of things that money can buy you. Back when I started out as a CA article. They called it an articleship when you start chartered accountancy. I started my articleship in 2007. The internet had just about begun. And I remember like we used to get really excited about your NRI cousins coming back because they'd bring back like stuff that you couldn't see. Today, like the kind of things that you can spend money on, I think is mind boggling just in terms of what's available, and from a cultural perspective, how normal it has become to be like, you know what, like you should get this designer bag. Like the other day, I'm scrolling, like everyone is just unboxing designer bags, and I'm like, wow, like it's not a thing anymore. It's not like something that was very exclusive. I worked in a CA office that had a few like HNI clients. We call them high net worth individuals, like, and I remember we used to sit and like go through their accounts and we'd be like, wow, they spent like 15,000 rupees on a meal in like the like the Taj. And then that was like such a thing. But today, I think we've allowed ourselves to really live a lifestyle or to have a lifestyle. I think culturally back then, there was a little of, it was a bit frowned down on almost because it's like, I can't have it, therefore I will hate it. Like I can't go to Europe, therefore I'll call anyone who goes to Europe like spendthrift or whatever. But today, I think culturally we've really opened up to the idea of like spending and allowing money to give us like that happiness or joy or whatever. I think we were a bit more restrictive back then. And today we've opened up, but obviously that has its own downsides. I think that is one big difference, the kind of things that money can buy us today and the exposure that we have. The second is also the amount of exposure that we have to the investment avenues and the options that are available to us. I think the AMFI has done a great job of like making mutual funds like the default option for investments. Like really great campaign, mutual funds sahi hai. You're constantly, it's in your face, like do the SIP, do this, do this, do this.
I mean, if Rohit Sharma is telling you to do an SIP and Sachin is, you must,
and
right?
Dhoni as well. So you must. So I think back in 2007 and 8, you only knew about mutual funds if you were in the finance industry, right? And you only had a demat account if you were in that circle. Today, I think it's fantastic how democratized it's become. You open an app, you snap a selfie, KYC done. Like you can start investing just like that. I think the ease and convenience of these aspects are fantastic. But I would say it's all come together, like the ease of payments through UPI as well as the ease of investing. So you have to like pick your poison. It's never been easier to get into technical trading, which was again like a very closed door sort of activity.
And a very skilled
Yeah,
one.
you needed a lot of technical skill. It was technical for a reason, right? Today, anyone can watch YouTube, set up an account, and like get started, which is terrifying because it's one of the easiest ways to lose money. Like people who studied it don't do it because they're like, you need a lot of time, energy, and effort.
And I think also the fact that I want to draw upon here is for folks who are trading and doing all of this, and we will get into that section, but we have full-time jobs, and trading and playing with stocks is a full-time job in itself. So I think for one moment we need to step back and say, which is the job that's giving me the salary? And often enough, I notice these days everyone is aiming to become a trader so they don't need a full-time job. And best believe there may be a point when you'll have neither of those, and you don't want to get there, especially the Gen Z and what, Gen X, what is it?
No, Gen X is like people born in the 70s and 80s who
Oh,
were
sorry,
basically
Gen
young
Alpha?
during the 90s. Gen Z and Alpha.
Alpha, yeah.
Alpha's probably our kids, yeah.
No. Oh, yeah, they already know how to spend money, so.
Yeah. No, but I think there is a lot of conversation. Like, I spend a lot of time on Reddit, okay? Like, it's one of my personal guilty pleasures.
Same. Yeah.
And there is so much conversation around FIRE, which is a topic I've discussed in the book, Financial Independence, Retire Early. This is a movement that is very popular among the 25 to 40-year-olds, where you want to very quickly amass a certain sum of money, right? So that you don't have to work a day job ever again. And basically, you are going to have to be very frugal.
To the most important years of
through
your
your
life.
20s, can you
Yeah,
imagine? You have to be super frugal through your 20s so that you can potentially retire at 40, which feels like a very long way away when you're 20. And the question, I think, the philosophical debates in that forum is constantly around, do I have to sacrifice my today for a better tomorrow?
And a lot of people, we'd be surprised these days, do. And there's no right or wrong in this. I think, just disclaimer, there's no right or wrong in what we're saying. There's no right or wrong in what is talked about in the book. It's just different things people are doing and what processes are followed to get to those points.
Yeah, one example is that there are a lot of people on that forum for fire who actively say that, Bhai, I don't want to get married. I don't want to
Yeah.
have kids. Because you will have to spend on your children. Children are
Yeah.
very expensive.
And that's covered in the
that
book,
is
yeah.
an entire chapter in the book. Things that no one told us before having the child. The amount of spending that you will do on the child is not at all discussed in our culture.
Yeah.
You're just told, go have
Have a
the child,
child,
you'll
have a
figure it
child.
out. But I remember the first time I went to take my newborn for a vaccine. And they said, the doctor said, see, you have two options. You can take the painless vaccine or you can take the normal one. Now, what kind of parent will take a non painless vaccine? I was like, I don't want to be like that mother who gives the child pain. I'll take the painless vaccine. So the catch was that the painless vaccine, three of them, came up to 10,000 rupees. And that was the first time I was like, my
What? Yeah.
God. And it wasn't like this was some massively, like, super posh hospital
Yeah.
or anything. It was a nursing home. Very regular, average nursing home in Chennai that said, if you want the painless vaccine, drop 10,000 rupees, you will get the 3 shots. My child still cried, but at least like I had the satisfaction of saying, okay, I gave the child the painless vaccine. But I remember sitting there and thinking, my God, he was just born.
Yeah.
I have already spent on the C-section. Now painless vaccine, and it doesn't stop, by the way. Fun fact. It just continues, and you have to save for them. Obviously, you want to make sure their future is protected. So no one talks about these things, right?
And I think add to that the fact that, and that's a generational change, right? And sometimes I think about it, our parents who decades ago had 2 kids, and our grandparents who had like 5 kids. My grandparents had 8 kids, and I'm like,
Yeah, my grandfather
but
had 7.
they did. And it's ridiculous because when you look at them, all the generational wealth in that sense has still been created by that generation. And a lot of youngsters I know these days are hoping at some point that inheritance is going to help them live well, wanting to do very little today. And just in terms of having children, and I love that point because we were talking earlier before the session started. My daughter is 3, Lavanya's son is 8. And even between these 5 years, there's such a change in spending, and the fact that 3 and 5 year olds now, luckily, my daughter yet doesn't know. I heard her friend who's 3 again telling her mom the other day, Mama, can you pay with Google? And I was like, oh my God, what are we in for? And if we don't start early enough to make conversations about money real in our houses, it's just going to be a huge problem. And I'm saying this because we're seeing different ages in this room. And again, in the book, Lavanya talks about the importance of like nominees and wills, and there's a chapter on that. But I still have friends who are my age whose parents are in their 70s or in their early 80s, and they call me and like, Deepika, how do I talk to my dad about his will? He's not feeling too well, and I know nothing about where his money lies. So I think this is a two-way problem. One where talking about money was not, it was taboo. We're not allowed to talk about this stuff. How can you ask me about my will at 80? Do you want me to die? But it's two-way where we need to ask and also they need to talk to us about this stuff. And Lavanya, I would want you to talk about that part of the book.
Absolutely, absolutely. So the name of that chapter is actually called Lessons from the Pandemic, because these were all a lot of first-hand accounts that I heard from people who lost their parents, and then they were just scrambling.
Yeah.
And because they had no idea what was where,
Yeah.
where, and thankfully all of them do have corporate jobs. It's not like they're reliant, they're not relying on that money. But at the same time, it's so traumatic to have to deal with a loss and then have to sit in like some government office trying to figure out, where
that
that
FD
paper
is.
is,
Yeah.
how to get this change, sitting in court, trying to get like some documents probated. It's very painful. And you can't, I think one of the things that I heard during that phase was that I did not have time to grieve.
Because I had to deal
Because
with,
you have to deal. And then there were also all these other instances where like the wives had no clue that there was insurance. Then the family CA, who was likely in another hospital himself, had to call and say that, sir has this insurance. Please make sure that, when the bill comes, make sure like you take care of it using that, or make sure you call this person and get the term insurance filed, because the insurance company is not going to, proactively come and like
hand you the
give you the
money.
money.
Yeah.
So taking the policy alone is not enough. You have to also know that the policy exists and what to do in order to claim it. So I feel like, because the father or like the head of the family who made these financial decisions did everything with good intent. I think that's the worst part. You have this head of the family who's taken all the right decisions
Yeah.
for his family but did not communicate. And then all that good work you did of thinking and doing all these things is gone completely to waste, because the child and the partner is just left completely like clueless, and they're running around and they have absolutely no time to grieve. And you're very right in that it is taboo, especially in households with like multiple children, right? Like, it's very normal for the father to ask, why do you want to talk about this? Do you want me to die?
Yeah. And
Like, it's
it
like
still
inviting
happens.
death, right?
And you've mentioned that in the book. Like,
Yeah,
just
yeah.
thinking of taking a term insurance to families makes it feel like you're inviting death. And I think
Yeah.
there are so many like stigmas attached to money as Indians more than like any other culture. And that itself needs a shift. I think hopefully at the end of this discussion today, when we go home through the course of this week, there's at least one new thing about money that we've read in the book or that we've learned, that we talk to a friend, talk to a parent, talk to your sibling about. Because
Or
if not
even
now,
just observe, right? I'll give you another very classic
Yeah.
example that happens in all our families. Two families go to eat dinner at a restaurant. Those two uncles, at the time the bill comes, there'll be one waiter in the middle who's like a few minutes short of being punched. And then that guy will be like, give it to me. No, I'll pay it. I'll pay it. No, I'll pay it. The waiter will be there in the middle. Two people will be pulling. Because it's a matter of like showing up, right? Like paying the bill. No one will say we'll split it.
which is
The
the
easiest
most sensible
do,
thing to
easiest
do.
thing to do. Two families, we can split the bill, no problem. No, one person has to jump on top of it. The other person has to pull it under. There'll be another third auntie who will be like, I'm just going to the washroom, and then she'll go tell the guy to be like, don't ring the bill. Here's the credit card. You put it down,
Yeah.
and so that they can come back and say it's already taken care of. Like the kind of things that we do as a culture around
Yes.
money. It's actually hilarious. And all I would ask is that you just observe these things. You'll realize
Realize
how
that.
deeply it's rooted in our culture.
No, and I think around the same point, and when you were talking about the COVID thing, it reminds me, I remember like at bases while COVID, this was 2021, or yeah, I think when the Delta cycle happened, one of the named and famed corporates called me and they were like, Deepika, we have 40 widows in our organization who've gotten money, and can you help them with dealing with what to do with that term insurance money that we've paid out to them, right? And I want to say about 90% of them, and I realized what you said, they didn't get time to grieve, A. B, it shocked me and it took me some learning and unlearning to deal with them and help them through that process, because they had never talked to their spouse about money except this is what you have to spend every month. Or even if it was a double income family, even if she was potentially earning, they never talked about it, which is highly problematic. Maybe not at that point, but how Lavanya pointed out, and I don't want to get into statistics and make it morbid, but we're seeing so many deaths between the ages of 25 to 40. So it's not really, there's no age attached to mortality
It's
anymore.
not an old person problem anymore.
Not at all. And we really need to absorb the reality of where we are. And I think moving on from this, not
No, and I'll add a few more points, right? Like because I want us to stay on this deeply uncomfortable topic. 40 is a stunning number of widows. It's shocking.
It is.
It is, right? And I'll tell you something else that is very Indian that happens in our families is that the moment the family gets wined, because we also don't know discretion around family money, right? The moment the wife gets it, she'll go tell the immediate family, like usually her brother, and it's usually the extended family that will say, I will come help. Then some cousin will be like, I will invest it for you. And then, like because you don't know what to do and you're happy to just like let
Hand it
somebody
over.
else handle it,
It is
they also
overwhelming.
get conned in the process. Like
Yeah.
this is not unusual. And there are statistics to show that more than 70% of property disputes in Indian courts today are between families, right?
Yeah.
Here's another consequence of not talking about money.
Money.
The grandfather will pass away without telling which property goes to which son, and then everyone's fighting it out in court.
No, and I think that unfortunately hasn't changed. I think we're talking about cryptocurrencies these days, we're talking about NFTs, we're talking about like artificial intelligence, but I'm almost like, where is the real intelligence? Like, we'll get to AI, but let's talk about the RI for a moment. And RI is really talking about money, dealing with stuff. And what you pointed out, Lavanya, and I was in the same room yesterday with a different group of people talking about a different topic related to money. And someone asked me, like, why did you get into this space? And truthfully, for me, the first shock in life was I lost my dad when I was 13, and there was some money that my mom was allowed to invest in after that. And one uncle walked in, and I'm going to take the name here. Hopefully, it's not going to go out. But it was a magazine, a Value Research, which was a magazine then. Now it's a website. He walked in with the magazine and pointed out some numbers that, oh, you put it in this mutual fund, this one, and it'll grow to 18, 20, 22%. Young widow, she's 33, doesn't know too much, has some sum of money to invest, asks one or two people, and of course, men in the room are like, oh my God, 20%, just do it. And when I got into college and when we needed to lean into that money and we reached out to him, we never heard back from him because he had made like ridiculous commissions by making those investments. And that money didn't grow, it was in the negative. I think I realized, and I was in business management, I was like, oh, first thing, can I just learn the basics that should this ever happen again, what are 4 questions we should ask? And that really was a game changer for me. And what I've realized, like 15, 17 years down the line, we're still not asking those questions. And I would want to like talk from the book, Lavanya. Like, what are 3 things one should ask someone who tells you that, hey, look at this investment?
The first question is, why are they talking about this particular investment?
Yeah.
Right? What's in it for them?
Yeah.
Right? So obviously, I think one of the prime categories of people who come to you saying, sir, there is a great investment, are usually like your bank relationship managers who will call you very concerned about you and your financial future.
And they're the first people like who know that your money's coming.
Yeah.
Wherever it's coming from. They
Yeah.
are the first, like.
Yeah. So if there's maybe your bonus got credited, right? They know. And they'll be like, there is an investment opportunity, and it's almost always an endowment plan, which is like a type of insurance plan where they tell you that, you get both insurance and investment. But the truth is, it's not insurance and it's not an investment. The only person who stands to gain is the relationship manager who will make 40% commission year on year. So I think the first question is why? Why are they recommending this? Whereas if it is a friend of yours who has also invested in it and seen some money in it, that might make a bit more sense, right? And then you can move on to the next question, which is, what am I investing in? And I think it's very important to get the other person to explain it to you in as simple words as possible. And if you do not understand what you're putting your money into, don't put your money into it. You're not missing out on anything. If you understand, okay, like by investing in a mutual fund, I'm putting money across different shares, across different businesses, so that when these businesses grow, my money also grows, right? If I'm able to articulate that to myself and I understand like intuitively, okay, like I'm putting money in gold, which is like this commodity which is considered precious by the world over, and when things are unstable like we're seeing right now, prices shoot up. Or if you believe in the metal, like I'm investing in gold, that is easy to understand, right? So if you're able to explain it to yourself and understand it intuitively, that would be the next
best,
next the question. And I think the third question is, how long am I supposed to be invested in it? When can I see results?
Yeah.
Right? Because you also can't be investing money indefinitely. At some point in time, because I say this because a lot of people also look into real estate, right? And they say, just 10 years, you see what happens to this property. And it's
Double.
double.
Yeah.
Double. You buy that plot, that's all. Double, 10 years. But 10 years is a long time. And stuff like encroachments happen. Suddenly the government will come and be like, I am acquiring this. We're building an
Yeah.
airport.
Metro.
Metro.
Bangalore, like
Yeah.
lots of people have lost properties in metro. They're never going to tell you, but they have.
Yeah. So road expansion. So all these are inherent risks, right? In a long period of time.
Yeah.
So you also want to tell yourself, okay, what am I investing in this for? What will it give me? And when can I get it? So I think these are the fundamental questions. It's written in a bit more detail in the book. I'm not able to like spit it right out. But overall, ask yourself what is the motivation for the other person
Yeah.
to recommend it to you. I think that's the most important question. What's in it for them? What is it, the goodness of their heart
They're telling you to do
that they're
this.
telling you to do something? Or is there something that's in for them also?
Yeah.
Right? And the second is, what am I actually putting money in? Those are the two most important questions. Understand what you're putting money in and figure out when you can get it out. Because at some point you should get it out.
Yeah. I think liquidity is something we don't talk about enough. And I think there's a part in the book which also talks about diversification, somewhat asset allocation. And I love how you talked about risk profiling, right? Because it's so overwhelming. You tell someone that who do a risk profiling exercise and they're seeing stars and it sounds like you're going into surgery and you need to fill a form before that. It's not hard. And I love that part, Lavanya. So I want you, if you can
I think I can actually
Yeah.
read it. So, your risk profile or your risk appetite is basically how you feel about losing money. People will say assessment, personality test, and all. It's essentially how you feel about losing money. Some of us can digest losing a bit of money. It's like, okay, like I can take a hit if it means that I'll get a big gain. Some of us are okay with the thought of writing off some amount of money if it means that things go bust, right?
Yeah.
I have a cushion. I can play, with 10,000 rupees, right? Let's put it in and see what happens. If I lose that 10,000, it's okay. There are some people who cannot lose that 10,000,
Yeah.
right? And a lot of times there is this wisdom that if you are young, you can absorb risk better. But I know a lot of very risk averse young people, and I know a lot of very risk happy older people
Yeah.
also, because they've made the money. Now
And they
can take
have
a
the
risk.
liquidity and the capacity to take the
Yeah.
risk.
And they have the
Denmark.
capacity to take a risk. So that is essentially risk profiling. So don't think of it as some Myers Briggs test, like people say INTJ, ENFP. It's not any of those
Yeah,
things.
it's quite easy and it's honestly quite fun to understand where you are from a risk profile, and also realizing that a 25-year-old in this room who's probably drawing the exact same salary as another 25-year-old in the room will not have the same risk profile. And that's where the fault lies, where often we're talking about money to people who are at a very different, I don't want to say stage, you're probably still at the same stage, but responsibility varies, risk capacity varies, and they're doing the same thing with their money. And that could definitely be a problem for one of them.
I think, okay, I'll read out from the book. I've basically come up with my own risk profiles in the book. So I'll take you through each one of them. What kind of risk taker are you? Broadly, there are 5 categories of risk takers. First, the safety first investor. The safety first investor is the conservative investor for whom safety of funds is paramount. They're okay with making minimal returns in return for a minimal or no risk. A safety first investor is happy making 5 rupees on his investment of 100 rupees if it means that he won't lose anything. 2. The training wheels investor. The training wheels investor is the moderately conservative investor who is willing to take small risks in exchange for proportionate returns in the long term. The training wheels investor would try to make 8 rupees on his investment of 100 rupees, but would also be okay if it means that he might lose 2 rupees while doing so. 3. The speed and seatbelt investor. This is the moderately aggressive investor who is willing to take risks for slightly increased returns in the medium and long term. The speed and seatbelt investor is comfortable losing up to 5 rupees in the short term if it means that he'll make 15 rupees on his investment of 100 in the medium to long term.
And
The-
I think, yeah.
Then there's the calculated risk taker who's willing to take more risks for high returns over the long term. And he's okay with his profile moving around and sometimes, losing up to 15 rupees on his investment of 100 if it means that he'll make 30 to 35 rupees. And finally, we have the adrenaline junkie who is willing to take high levels of risk in the long and in the short term for maximum returns. The adrenaline junkie is likely to, these are the guys you find in casinos. Okay. They want to double everything and they're okay with losing their entire pot if it means that they can make double. Now, general investing wisdom states that the younger you are, the more risk that you can take, right? But what you need to know is that risk profiles are a spectrum. It's not a point. I'm saying speed and seat belt, adrenaline junkie, safety first. We can be a bit of both also. You can be a bit of an adrenaline junkie with a smaller amount. You can be a safety first with another amount. So it's a spectrum. It's not a point. And your risk profile isn't just based on your age, it's also based on your personal ability to roll with the dips, as well as your financial circumstances. Like I said, if you're young, you're just starting out, you have parents back at home who are retired, you need to send your salary to them, right? Maybe you have a sibling who's going to college, whose fees you need to cover. You can't afford to take much risk. Whereas if you're 40, right, your kids are settled, you've paid their, okay, not 40, 50, sorry. I'm also very close to 40.
Like, no.
I just realized. So if you're 50, your kids have finished college, you've paid off their fees, you have money, your PF has rolled in, and you're very comfortable where you are. You can take a bit of risk. I've seen a lot of 50-year-old uncles, like
Roll that dice for me. Yeah.
60, 55, 60, 65, very interested in cryptocurrencies because they're like, I have some money. They'll
Yeah.
come to you, to office and they'll be like, I have some money. What do you know what this crypto is? So technically, like according to general investing wisdom, when you're 60, you're not supposed to be taking risks. You're supposed to be safe because, you'll need the money and everything. But things can flip, like maybe you were like a CEO, you've just gotten out, you're flush with cash.
Yeah. And that
So-
happens to a lot of people these days and also doesn't happen to most people. And I think we need to, and that's covered in like Vivek's chapter in the book, right? When you have the
Yeah.
chat with him, when he's talking about the three kinds of people who make money. And one is like, I think he says in the casino, two is who gets an inheritance, so three
Yeah.
is someone who gets really lucky.
Yeah. And most of us don't fall in any of those three brackets. It's not like all of us are capable of taking like extreme risks. And it's also timing, right? So think about the guys who bought crypto in 2020 and sold it in 2021, just before, So those guys got really lucky. And then there are people, of course, who inherit Nepo babies, as we like to call them. There are guys who just get it right with timing. Maybe you joined Infosys in 1993 and you got like stocks. Like you can't plan for those kind of things. So
And I just I'll take one pause there, Lavanya. And I think I've highlighted this in my book, and it's from the same chapter on risk profiling, right? And I think and I love the part where you talked about, the two professors in your chartered accountancy.
yeah,
And I think
yeah.
if we don't have too much time to talk about it. If we do, we'll get into it. But that essentially is talking about how you need to do stuff to understand it versus the theory of money, which unfortunately is now available on the phone, on an Instagram reel, which
Did
is,
you know? Did
yeah.
you know? There's a visual hook also. Like you have to like jump into the screen and be like, "Did you know?" But I think I'll share the little anecdote. I think basically when I studied chartered accountancy, there's a subject called cost accounting. Cost accounting is the most difficult chapter, a difficult subject. It's impossible to clear. Is the perception around it. People really scare the shit out of you when they speak about costing. They're like, oh my God, costing, costing. So Chennai is one of the hubs when it comes to chartered accountancy kind of education and classes. So I had this one teacher, Mr. P. Everyone loved him. He'd just walk in and then, he'd do a lot of like hand waving and he'd explain concepts. And then I'd come in from the CBSE background, which believed that concepts were superior. And I sat in his classes, really enjoyed them. We barely did 5, 6 problems, and predictably, I failed in the costing paper. And my father said, okay, you've had your decisions. I'll make the decision for you. And he sent me off to another class. One Mr. Sarana Prasad, I'll take his name. And if Mr. P was very good at hand waving, Sarana Prasad was all about handwriting. Every day, all we had to do was come to class and he'd make us do problem after problem after problem. And he'd be like, it's not your job to learn concept. He'll be like, you pass the exam and then you learn the concept in your free time. That was literally what he used to say. And I'd be like, what is this technique? What are they teaching? But then what I realized was that when he'd give us formulas and frameworks. He'd be like, if it's this kind of problem, you apply this framework. And then he'd make us do sums over and over and over again. And what I realized was that theory is endless, right? When it actually comes to the problem at hand, you need to have a framework. And you won't have a framework unless you start doing. So you need to start doing and doing and doing and doing. And I passed my exam. So that was how I became a chartered accountant at the end of it. So I owe it to him. But I think it was a very important life lesson for me in terms of like, you can keep studying, right? Like, I think investing, that's why it's so daunting. There's so much knowledge. And it's like, where do I start? Where do I begin? There's so much that I don't know. You will never know everything. So you might as well start. Oh,
And
let
I think
someone.
also accepting that you don't know, because a lot of times we don't want to accept that we don't know this, and we say this. I mean, especially as women, right? It's almost embarrassing that I don't know this and let me just like Google my way through it. It may not be relevant to my situation, but it's okay because we don't talk about it enough. We don't ask the right questions. And I think we'll go to that section. But before that, I do want to read this line from the book, right? It's from the risk profiling chapter, which is an important but never talked about aspect about investing is that money is emotional and we're not formulae. You can't substitute the letters and numbers and expect the same result each time. We are products of our lived experiences. And I love, and I think I'm on the same page about it. Oftentimes people ask us that, what should my diversified portfolio percentage be? 100 minus my age, this is what my risk profile should be. But we're not formulae. We're all so different. And I think let's talk about that. And I do want to go into the financial intimacy part next.
Of course, that's my favorite chapter.
Yeah.
That's the thing, right? When I said everyone's circumstances are different, general investing wisdom is general. They're broad guidelines to help you get started, right? But everybody's financial circumstances are very different. Like I said, if I might be 28, ripe for risk taking, but if I have a sibling to support, if I have families to support, I can't be working off of this formula. I need to figure out what is right for me, and that requires some introspection, and that requires accepting a few things also. I feel like in today's day and age, especially like, all of you guys are like probably having really amazing careers in Bangalore. I can't imagine the levels of peer pressure that you're also going through, right? Because there are folks who need to support families. There are also folks who don't have anything to support, who get to enjoy the entire salary, who get to live with their parents. You don't have to pay rent, you know. So there are folks with privileges as well. And all of you come to office and then you're talking about certain things, right? Like we're in summer. Where did you go on holiday?
Yeah.
Stuff like
Yeah.
that. And all of those things get to you.
They do.
They get to you, right? And then some guy will be like, I put money in this investment, like thoda risky hai, but like returns will be great. And that's probably someone who can absorb the entire thing going bust also,
Yeah.
right? But I can't because I actually have
responsibilities.
responsibilities. And that's why I keep saying, like, when people say, what do I do? What do I put money in? It's not as straightforward as you think. You need to spend some time to understand where you are in your life and what you're allowed to play with and what you can do, right? And that's why talking about money becomes important. And when I say we get emotional about money, right? Like imagine if this amazing thing that you try to invest in that promised to double your money, it went out. Like you'd be gutted because that was supposed to have been, your sibling's school fee or your sibling's college fee. Or maybe you were supposed to get like help in with like your sibling's wedding or whatever, which is another big responsibility. So it really affects you. And I feel like people don't appreciate or think about it at all. Instead, they're like investment. They look at that from a very like cold way. And then when something happens, they're like, oh my God.
Yeah.
Right? So I think the reason I wrote about that was because everybody's situation is different, and therefore everyone's diversification or everyone's portfolio structure is different. There's another little comparison that I've given in the book. I say that everyone's portfolio is like garam masala in the sense that everybody has their own masala blend at home. Like your mother's masala blend, you can't find in any store. It's taken years.
Everyone's mom's masala blend is the best one.
Yeah,
So
it's the best
let's
one.
yeah.
And it was tailor made for that household. It was tailor made for your preference, for her preference,
For
your
your,
father's preference.
Yeah, for your like what you can palate, right?
Yeah, some families can't handle spice. Some families love spice.
Yeah.
And that masala is ground in that proportion. And I always think how amazing it is that we are able to customize this so precisely, right? And it never changes. Also, like my mother makes something called parapu podi at home. And the pepper content in it is very specific to what my family likes and what my family enjoys. And portfolios are built in very similar ways. It's like what you can palate, it's what you can take, and it's what is good for you. So I think I wrote that mostly to tell people don't follow generic things beyond a point. Take the time to think about your own responsibilities before you follow formulas or before you follow something off of the internet, because there is a lot of unnecessary free information.
And I
That's
think
not
there
fun.
is only free information. Can you remember the last information on the internet you paid for? And the fact that you didn't pay for it is a problem in itself.
When
So
you don't pay for a product, you are the product.
yeah.
So that's what they said for Facebook.
And I think if you are consuming information, especially on these subjects, it's important to like maybe just Google the qualification of the person giving you. I don't want to take the name of the influencer, and he's still thriving and how, but
It's a lot of them. All of us will be thinking like,
yeah,
which
kaun
one
tha
is
wo?
she
Who is she
talking?
talking about? But yeah, he in fact got well funded and by one of the most famous men in the country. And and I remember then there was this whole thing which just went under the covers where SEBI sort of penalized him for not being qualified to give you that info. And then remember right after a few months later when all this like went under covers and someone from his team wrote on LinkedIn and she was like, I wasn't paid for XYZ months. And the irony wasn't lost on me. And here's this person teaching you everything about financial planning and seemingly didn't know how to run his business. So it's important who we're learning from. And for 1 second, Lavanya, I think because we're also seeing, different generations in this room, I do want to talk about, because very fresh. We were talking to some friends about it yesterday, and it's this whole scam, this whole digital arrest, and all of this that's happening to older folks, right? Not just older folks. I know someone who's a VC was in digital arrest, and that's ridiculous to me. But it's again, to me, it's because we're ashamed. If one person who was digitally arrested told like 500 people, like put out a post, put out a tweet, or told 20 people in his family, you're saving them from that, right? And we were talking about a lady in the army who lost about 3 crore rupees, and her husband only got to know in the end when the last FD broke, because they never talked about it. She was so scared to tell him that this is happening. And I think that language of money within households should be made easier. And honestly, this book is a great start. It'll leave you with enough and more to just make money more mainstream at home, make it dinner table conversations like Sunday mornings, like, hey, let's look at our portfolio, let's look at our different risk profiles. And I think we should get to that point. I know it's some time away, but it's important we talk about it so we're at least aware. And I think I want to talk about the most fun section in the book, and that's been, we've previously talked about it. It was very fun for us as well, which is financial intimacy, right? And like I said, I was in the same room yesterday. It was only with a group of women, and this woman took me to the side later, and she was like, Deepika, in our equation as a family, I love my husband very much, but I do all the spending, and the entire portfolio is in his name. And my business is like bleeding right now, and I don't have the guts to tell him that, hey, I want my money to make sure I'm thriving as an entrepreneur, right? And let's talk about financial intimacy.
Yeah, I don't think we want to acknowledge how money affects our relationships, right? We think of love as very pure, and to like throw money at it is almost like polluting it, right? Like, why would you want to bring money into conversations about love? Love is very pure, right? Very poetic.
Money is corrupt, like,
Yeah. Why would you want to throw something as corrupt as money into something as beautiful and poetic as love? But the truth is that once this initial love fades, money enters that equation, sits there, gets very comfortable until one of you get kicked out, right? So we really need to accept. I feel like all of us know this, but we're not ready to accept it just yet. But your financial backgrounds and your financial histories and your financial values play a huge role in how your relationships work on a day to day basis, right? And we don't want to talk about this. Like, um, I don't know, today's modern dating scene sounds like hell, and I'm very glad that I'm not a part of it or I didn't have to experience it. I got married very young, but it's very hard, right? Like, to talk about money with your partner, because it's like something that's very, it almost makes you feel bad for bringing the subject up, but it'll affect you in every way, starting from where you want to go get coffee. Do you want to go to Hatti Kapi, or do you want to go Starbucks, Third Wave, or any some boutique coffee? From there to like debt, right? Like, who pays what loan? Let's say both of you are dating, you have an education loan, um, but your partner doesn't, right? So when you continue earning, is your partner going to help you pay that education loan off? Let's say you're going to get married, you have parents who are dependent on you. Are you going to continue to like support them? Like, how is that going to work? Maybe your partner's parents are dependent. Like, is your salary also going to go into supporting them? There's no right answer. I would never say, oh, you need to keep your money to yourself and he needs to keep his money to himself, and then, there's no right answer. It ultimately comes down to how the two of you feel you should take that decision. But the point is that you need to take those decisions together. We can give you guidelines, right? Like, okay, you have your account. Like, between me and my husband who's sitting there, we have our separate accounts, and then we have a joint account. But every transaction is discussed. It's not like this is mine and it's like under my pocket and it's my money, and like that is his money and I have no idea about what's going on over there, and this joint account is the only space where we have visibility. It's not like that. everything is discussed. These are like matters of convenience between the three of us, right? In terms of like, okay, you know what, school fees can go out of like the joint account. You need to be able to have that comfort to discuss those payments. It's very admin, it's very unsexy, it's very like, oh my god, like this is like the worst thing I can talk
Yeah.
about at this particular point in time. And you'll also realize how different your risk profiles also are. Like I am more of the risk taker, and therefore like now I manage the investment. So there is no formula, right? And that's why it's very important to talk, because it's only when you talk and you guys agree on something that you're going to be comfortable with the money decisions that are going to be made.
And I think the cultural aspects as well. Like, I'm a
Yeah.
Sindhi married to a Punjabi sitting right here, staring at me as I say this. But after we got married is when we realized that how different our cultures are, just in terms of how we deal with money, right? And especially in a relationship, and definitely when you have a child,
Yeah.
you have to be on the same page about most things, if not all.
Yeah. And things get especially complicated when you have the child, because you also have to agree on how you're raising them, right? Are you going to put them in a school that is aspirational? Because I think for a lot of us, we also want our kids to get what we didn't have.
Yeah.
Like our generation has that whole like, I will give my child everything, like I will give them best of the best and all of that. So do you put them in a school which is aspirational, which means that there's also going to be a lot of baggage that comes with that school. Your birthday parties will all be at like some
Yeah, 5 stars.
five-star hotels, play areas, like fully catered food, when you were expecting like samosa, chips, and Pepsi, and like
Yeah.
one cake, and like all of us were having party hats.
Yeah.
No, none of that stuff. There'll be productions, and then like every party favor has to be like thoughtfully curated, and
Yeah.
like all of that stuff, right? The schools come with all of that. So are you going to give your child that? Or are you going to be like, you know what, I'm going to be really hands on with my kid, but I want to send him to like your regular CBSE
Yeah.
school? You have to agree on
On.
what you can afford, what you cannot afford. And then you also have to agree on like very small things, like um where are we buying groceries from? Like for some of us, we're a working couple, so there'll be lots of times when I keep telling myself I should go to the mandi, I should go to the mandi, I need to buy vegetables from the market, but you don't have time. So you have to agree, okay, like Blinkit is where we're going to get groceries from. It's
Yeah.
fine. But you have to be level from the smallest things
To the larger life
to,
decision.
are we going to buy a house?
When are we going to buy
When
it?
are we going to buy a house? Do we save for real estate? If we do, like what kind of house can I afford? Like it is from the smallest of things to the biggest of things, and you need to get comfortable talking about it. I'm not going to tell you that it's easy, because it's not.
It's
It's
ridiculously hard.
very hard. I'll tell you this, like even before I spoke to my husband about money and all, I did his taxes. I've seen his bank account. So we got married in June, and I remember July I filed his taxes, and around September, October, November, I had guts to finally be like, okay, we need to talk about all these things. So despite the fact that I'd seen everything, like it's almost like prying a body open, no, and like seeing everything. I knew everything that was going on. I was filing his TDS returns also at that particular point in time. So I was his CA, but it took me more time to like actually talk to him about money. And it's ridiculous how hard it is, because you're constantly on this other side, like, is he judging me? Is he judging me? Is he judging me? And that's usually what happens, right? Like you really like this person.
Is he
You
going to
don't-
tell his mom? Like, that's the next one.
Oh, there's an entire chapter on financial red flags, which includes this. So, um, I think because we like this person so much, right? We don't want to go and screw it up by talking about money, but you'll realize that your compatibility as a couple really depends on how you're able to take these money decisions together, because ultimately this is everyday life. Yeah, you can say I love you, I'm so like in awe of you, I love everything about you, but if day to day you're arguing about groceries, if you're arguing about rent, if you're arguing about who switched the AC on, if you're arguing about do we need Netflix or not,
It's
really
not fun.
stressful.
It's not fun at all.
It's very stressful. And it can, and because we are Indians, it also seeps into the families. You know,
Yeah.
I think your mother is spending too much.
Yeah.
I think your dad doesn't know what he's investing in.
Yeah.
Like it's not
Yeah.
unusual. And then these become like judgments, and then you guys are arguing, and then
Yeah.
at some
yeah.
point the relationship dies, right? So it's very important. There is no straight or smooth path to this either. You guys will have to figure it out, and you'll have to respect each other through the way, but you will find out if you're compatible or not in the long run, which is why the advice is always the earlier you're able to like break this open, the better, because
Yeah. It does get too late for some couples, and I know we all probably know some couples where it got really late for them.
And on that note, I'd like to thank Lavanya and Deepika for this incredible session.
You have been listening to BIC Talks by Bangalore International Centre. If you liked what you heard, do follow us on social media. Keep up with our programming by signing up for our mailer on the website or leave us a review on Apple Podcast or iTunes. The crew that makes these podcasts possible is S. Sarvana Raj and Ranjit Kumar on sound supervision and production. Artwork is designed by Chandani Venkataraman of Crisscross Design Studio. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel on your favorite podcast platform. It can also be accessed on our website, bangaloreinternationalcentre.org. This is Sunaina Jain signing off on behalf of everyone at BIC.